Hello and welcome to the Friday, September 8th, 2017 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich and today I'm recording from Jacksonville, Florida. Well, and sadly, it looks like Struts vulnerabilities are not going away. We do have a second vulnerability here in Apache Struts. This vulnerability is also a remote code execution vulnerability, but it only affects fairly specific expressions. So if you're not using these particular constructs in your code, then you shouldn't have a problem. Of course, there will be a problem that you now have to figure out whether or not you're using these constructs in your code, and that could make things a little bit more complicated. But well, the short answer is a patch and update to the yet latest and greatest version. That would be Struts 2.5.12 and Struts 2.3.34, depending on if you're on the 2.5 or 2.3 branch. At the same time, we are actually seeing exploit attempts against the earlier Struts vulnerability, so that definitely has taken off after the Metasploit module was released. The exploit attempts that we have seen so far appear to be triggered by that Metasploit module, so individual attempts, no big kind of worm at this point, but we all know that's coming next, and that's probably going to show up within the next few days. Still, I'm seeing enough of these exploit attempts where I would say if you are running a somewhat higher profile website, someone probably already tried this particular exploit against your site. So again, before you update or as you update, make sure that your site hasn't already been compromised. And I usually don't cover a lot of breaches here because there are just too many of them, but we do have one that's quite significant that was made public today, and it affects the US Credit Bureau Equifax. Equifax apparently got compromised, and with that, information for 143 million US consumers was leaked. Now, this is significant not just because of the scale of the breach, but also because it does affect one of the credit rating agencies where people usually are being provided with free credit monitoring if their data was leaked in just such a breach. It's not really clear yet at this point how Equifax will react to this. There is some word out there that, well, you'll get free credit reporting with Equifax, which of course you may have gotten already because of a breach that you were subject to in the past. Intruders apparently had access to social security numbers, names, addresses, birth dates, driver license numbers, credit card numbers, essentially all the data that credit reporting agencies usually have access to. Where credit card numbers weren't really such a big deal here, only 200,000 of those got leaked, probably from users who use credit cards to pay for services with Equifax during the time of the breach. In the end, I don't think that really substantially changes anything when it comes to these type of breaches. You should assume that your social security number, your birthday has already been leaked in one of these many prior breaches we had so far. If you're adding up all the breaches, essentially what you end up with is that every individual's data has been leaked at some point. Now, this breach was announced after the stock market had closed in extended trading. The stock then fell 13% from its high today. Now, on Wednesday, I talked about the MasterCard Internet Gateway Services flaw. Now, in this particular case, there were problems in how these validation hashes were exactly calculated. Part of the issue also was a hash extension flaw, which is actually quite common and often not quite well understood by developers. You're essentially at risk of this particular vulnerability whenever you simply take a secret, concatenate it with whatever data you want to verify, and then hash the result. An attacker can just add appropriate padding and then append additional values to whatever data you're hashing here and still end up with a valid hash. Adrian has a great write-up about this particular flaw and how to exploit it. So if you are dealing with this problem, take a look at his diary for more details. Well, it's a Friday again, so I got with me another STI student. Matt Hosberg is here with me. Matt, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, good morning, Johannes. My name is Matt Hosberg. I'm a cyber threat hunter for a company called Radian, who's based out of Philadelphia, and they specialize in credit enhancement services such as mortgage insurance for home buyers. Recent STI graduate student, so I just completed everything back in July. And I'm very, very thankful to be done at this point.
That sounds great. So now you have time for a lot of extra fun, and we'll talk a little bit about one of your research papers, which was sort of around the idea of threat hunting and, well, how to use sort of deception as part of this. Can you explain a little bit how this all fits together and what you talked about in your paper?
Yeah, no problem. So the premise is leveraging offensive countermeasures or active defense for threat hunting. And I had two goals of the paper, the research. One was to show the kind of the human element of threat hunting, and then secondly to kind of show how we can leverage that human element for techniques such as active defense.
So active defense now, that of course hopefully doesn't mean that you're attacking back. Can you tell a bit how you used active defense and what this term really means?
Yeah, so maybe to frame it up a little bit better, active defense in the context of threat hunting. So I focused on basically there's 3 A's of active defense, and this is coined by John Strand and Paul Asadorian in a book they wrote several years back. And they basically have 3 A's that are annoyance, attribution, and attack. And for this research, I really honed in on the attribution aspect. So really what I was looking at is how do we identify and attribute an attacker more on an individual level. And so active defense does have an attack aspect to it as well. But again, I was just focused on the attribution section.
Can you give us an example on how you used active defense and how it worked for you?
Yeah, so back to the human element, we all are very, very familiar with breaches and things that happen and massive data loss. And so one of my things I looked at were some of the very, very well-known data loss, incidents that have happened in the past. In particular, if you think back several years to a case with Chelsea Manning, who was a Army private in the Army, leaked hundreds upon thousands of diplomatic cables and Army reports. And really the catalyst, I think, for the Arab Spring and even some of the Occupy movements. So I wanted to show that cascading effect that those type of leaks had. But with the premise of trying to find out if there's a way we can decrease that detection delta to kind of find out if there are insiders or potential insiders present. And so what I did with the active defense techniques with attribution is I leveraged a solution they have in there. It's called the web bug server. And all it really is a server that you can deploy on-premise or in a cloud, and you essentially stage documents or emails with a very, very simple web bug, so that when the document is open or a email is open, a callback is sent to that web bug server, and you can track things like the source IP address, the document ID. You can trace back a user agent string to kind of help to confine or have a more succinct list of potential insiders. So what I would leverage is that first stage is kind of casting a wide net. So you could stage these documents within various department shares that might take a little effort to get to, so it's not completely obvious. And then based on any type of callback traffic you would see from it, you could kind of whittle a list down into a more definitive or potential list of insiders with that. So.
Now this sounds like quite a bit of work, and I know that John Strand, you mentioned him, he came up with ADHD, the active defense harbinger distribution, I think is what he's calling it. Did you mostly use open source tools like that for it, or what kind of tool set helped you set this all up?
So one of my favorite parts of doing this research was leveraging ADHD and then also Security Onion. And the beauty about these systems, not only can you set them up in a lab environment and test out any type of configuration your mind can come up with, there are also tools that are they're free, being open source, but you can also scale these up to maybe an enterprise level. And so one of the things that I like to always point out is a lot of my research throughout the course of the program, I leveraged Security Onion. So big kudos to Doug Burks and his crew for maintaining that. It's come a long way. And so what I really wanted to do with all of this threat hunting and web bug callbacks was to pump that over into Security Onion, and then basically with the latest version of Security Onion, they've leveraged Elasticsearch and Kibana, and so you can easily and rapidly kind of set up alerts and or visualizations for that data. So very, very cool. I guess things they're doing in that space, and very easy to enable researchers like me to do some work. So.
Now, one sort of promise of this work with deception and active defense is to reduce your false positive rate, because you're no longer relying really on signatures per se, but you're actually relying on the attacker downloading that particular document. Did you find this true that there were less false positives than you had with other methods, and any false positives still left that you sort of had to weed out manually?
Oh, sure. And so taking maybe a half step back, so threat hunting in my mind is kind of it's the area where you may be doing research or investigating things where there's not necessarily a definitive alert for, and so what active defense combined with that threat hunting is we're really trying to minimize that false positive rate. And so what I found was the more documents that would be distributed, the higher your rate of false positives would be. However, if you would stage these documents as you were casting that wide net into areas where maybe just a curious user opening that document wouldn't necessarily stumble on. This would take maybe some effort, or somebody who was actually looking for particular documents or data within the organization. Now, with that wide net that was cast, and you can kind of whittle the list down from that, I leveraged another tool called Mole Hunt, which is essentially a way to create a unique web bug document per user. And so that in turn could be placed in an area maybe where that user only has access to. And so if that does get leaked or opened or whatever, you have a lower false positive rate. So you can say, yeah, for sure we have a problem and we need to either set up additional monitoring, alert the SOC, or if we have some type of procedure around that, we can. Now, one thing though I would caution is there's a couple things going on with the documents that are opened. Let's say you have a cloud-based system and you have a on-premise system. If that document is opened and beacons back to a cloud-based system, you'll probably see the IP address of the organization. Now, if which may not be an indicator you have an insider, it could just be somebody curious. Now, if you start to see that callback traffic with, let's say, a public IP address, that's a very high indication that that document has been leaked. And even if, let's say, you had a DLP system or some other monitoring in place, it could be another indicator that for sure somebody is circumventing those systems somehow. Maybe they're encoding it, maybe they're exfiltrating it via external media or something like that. So kind of a way to reduce or at least get more visibility into the documents that actually have left the organization.
Now that sounds really interesting. Now, given that you're done with your degree at this point and have plenty of free time on your hand, I guess, after finishing all that work, anything you're up to next?
It's funny you say free time. I don't know how where all that free time goes, but it's like a vacuum. There's always it always gets filled. I would say right now, though, I'm working on refining our threat hunting program at Radian, so I'll continue on that. But I'm going to probably dive more into the active defense realm and see where I can actually integrate that more with threat hunting. And I guess with all that in my spare time, I might actually try to contribute to the ADHD project. I'm not sure. So.
That sounds great. So thanks for your time here, and thanks for joining us, and thanks everybody for listening. That's it for today. Talk to you again on Monday. Bye. Okay, I think that works well. Do you still have the link for the upload?